Okay, so picking up right where we left off in the stencil part of the project, we're going to have a look at transferring particles that have hit the surface into a wet map. So essentially a wet map is, as it sounds, it's going to be able to, wherever a particle is, it's going to transfer that information to a pixel or a point on the surface. In our case, we're going to be utilizing vertex maps. And to demonstrate the wet maps, it's probably easier for me to just create a separate plane. Let's tidy up the scene a bit. I'm just going to drop that corrugated side into there. And this plane is going to be our wet map demo. So let's just give it a few more subdivisions, a few more segments, and let's make it editable. And in X-Particles, the wet maps are created using a wet maps tag. So I right click, X-Particles tags, xpWetMap. And currently, by default, it's set to render only, which means it'll only process that on render time only. I'm going to uncheck that. And obviously nothing's going to happen until we have a source for our wet map to generate. So let's grab an xpEmitter. Oops, xpEmitter. And let's bring that up to the surface. Now we don't need any collision or anything, just as long as the particles are in proximity. So let's just generate some particles. Oh, let me turn off, I think our shipping logos, yeah. So let's turn that off whilst we're doing this. Okay. Let's just display the wire, the frame, all the lines on there. There we go. Now, currently there's no way to view this. We can't tell what's going on with our wet map. There is a material and a shader. So if we throw this on here, and we can actually add a wet map, where is it? X-Particles wet map shader. But I'm actually not interested in using that today because we're going to be using Vertex Maps. So I'm going to just jump straight to the Vertex Maps. I'm going to add a vertex map onto there. And then what I'll do is I'm going to add a vertex map to this surface. So if I just go to polys and I go set vertex weight, I'm going to set it to 0%. Let's call this tag something. Let's call this tag wet map out. There we go. And then select the wet maps tag, and then I'm going to just drag this into the wet map out option there. So, and the vertex sample size is essentially, it'll take whatever the wet map feeds it in terms of information, and it'll kind of smooth it out if it needs to. I think we can drop this right down to something like, actually, because we're dealing with, let's leave it at that for now, see what happens. So I press play. Nothing's happening because I don't think we've assigned a source. Nope. So we need to actually drag the emitter into there to make sure that it knows that that is doing that. And if I select it now, we see something very interesting happening. So you can see that it's transferred those particles, and those weights are actually being transferred to that surface. So if we go back to this tag, and in fact, what I'll do is I'll bring this tag, I'll open this in a locked attributes window, just so we can tweak the dials while still selecting this vertex map. So we can see it. In fact, I think there's a way you can actually, on the color vertex maps, you can actually have them viewing all the time, but I don't think you can with the vertex map. But anyway, so currently you can see all these settings here. So distance, that's pretty straightforward. That's the distance it's going to sample from the particles. And the lower it is, the closer it'll be to the particle's shape. Original shape. There we go. In fact, if I display the particles in circle mode, there we go. We can kind of see where they are in space, and then it's going to add an extra several units. In fact, the vertex sample size is probably what's helping there as well. So you can see, if I increase that, it's actually expanding it beyond what I've told it to with the wet map. Okay, so other options, stuff like what is the wetness value? Well, this is kind of how much it transfers to the surface. So if you look, it keeps transferring and transferring to the surface, but it takes a lot of particles. In fact, let's just hide the particles. It takes a lot of particles to even start becoming visible. So if it continually adds to it, it'll continually become stronger and stronger. However, we actually have a fade value, so it'll actually fade over time as well. So if I put the fade value to 0, and the wetness to say like 10%, you can see it's applying a lot. But then if I drop it to 1%, it's very faint, and it eventually comes in because it's, you know, new particles are constantly adding information to the wet map. And there we go. Now we're not going to utilize the fade value. Like I said, there's also a spread value. So this can actually spread. If I increase the spread rate here, it requires a lot more processing for this one to work. So let's make the wetness higher again. Let's drop that radius down. And actually, let's reset the iterations to 1. So that essentially means it'll expand, it'll grow beyond, it'll start spreading across the surface beyond. But I find that quite an expensive operation. Let's put it at 20%, 50%. Oof, if I do, it's the distance that really I didn't like there. So let's do that again. You can see it's kind of fading out and sort of spreading across the surface a little bit, a bit like it would soak into a surface. So if you've got a surface where it's going to soak in, like a fabric or paper, something like that, this is probably what you want to use. But for our purposes, we're actually keeping it really simple. We're going to drop it down. No spreading, no fading, just the standard and a vertex map out. And then what we can do is we can actually transfer this all over to our system over here. So let's get rid of that. We don't need the vertex map. We can recreate that wet map tag. So let's close that as well. And we're going to add the the wet map tag to our container collider here. Oh, I needed to assign that material. That doesn't matter. So I'm going to set vertex weight again. I'm going to add this one, and again, let's just call it wet map feature vertex. And then I'm going to add also a wet map tag. You can find all these obviously in the X-Particles menus. I believe wet maps is in, it's actually just in tags if you right click. So right click, X-Particles tags. And there we go. I tend to use Commander a lot, so that's why you'll see me jumping to that. So let's connect that up. Let's change it from render only. And now let's tell it to utilize the emitters from this one. In fact, actually, we're not going to use the emitter. We can use the group. So instead of just using the emitter, let's just use the painted group. And let's double check some settings in the actual wet maps tag. Remember, we don't want the fading. We don't want the spreading. We'll just leave this default for now, and you'll see this probably won't work out very well, but let's press play. You can see we're getting big lumps of paint or vertex weight because the radius that we have on all of these things is huge. And we're actually not getting any detail at all. So we need to reduce first of all, let's reduce the distance down to like 1. I think, well, actually, yeah, no, let's match the vertex radius. Now this resolution, this actually refers to the wet map. It's actually oversampling. So essentially it's not relying on the surface. It's actually relying on like a resolution of a rendered map in the background. But we don't need to worry too much about that. I might drop that down to 1 in a second. We'll see. But as you can see, as I press play now, because I reduced the radius of the sampling, we're actually getting a more accurate representation of our logo and of our particles. So that's looking pretty cool. Except you'll note that it's very low resolution, it's pretty jaggedy and all that stuff. So you'll know eventually we'll need to increase the resolution. But for now, whilst we're testing and stuff, I think we'll keep it down a little bit lower. I definitely don't want it to be quite as aggressive on the painting. So the wet map, I only want it to apply a gentle amount because we've got so many particles all applying their wetness values. They're going to add up really quickly, and you can see straight away it gets immediately filled in anyway. So there we go. And the particles still exist in this location. So if I hide first of all, let's turn off, grab the stencil group and change it display to none. I think we need to go back to the beginning and press play again. There we go. Now, what I was saying is that the particles are still on the surface. They're still in existence. So can you see the pink particles? And that means that they are still being sampled for the wet map. And they're constantly being sampled and sampled and sampled for the wet map. So what I want to do is I actually want to kill them off. I don't want them to be calculated anymore. So if you wanted to leave them in the scene, you could always have them swap groups again. So eventually, like after a certain amount of time, you can swap a group. And that group obviously is not going to be associated with the wet map. Therefore, it won't be calculated with it. However, I think killing them off is just as easy. We're going to not be displaying them. So we're not going to be rendering the particles themselves. We're going to be rendering stuff the particles have generated. So what we'll do is after the collision has occurred on this surface, we're going to add another action. So add action. And what we'll do is we will change their life. Direct action, change life. And by default, that is the one that kills the particles. We do not want them to do that. So we want them to set, let's do set new lifespan relative to age. What that'll allow us to do is it'll kind of kill them off. Once they've hit the surface, it'll kind of give them a new lifespan of, you know, let's say between 5 and 20 from the point they hit the surface. And then what's the action that's going to occur with this? Well, this is the action, I should say. So actually, let's drag that into the actions, drag it down here. And this is relative to the painted particles. Although actually, no, we'll use this same action. In fact, whilst we're here, we'll use the same action on this one. So it's going to happen, the same thing is going to happen on the stencil group. But for now, we'll just do it on the... Okay, so our particles are getting painted on by the original emitter. And there, can you see that the pink ones are now fading away? By the way, if the performance whilst the wet maps is active is too low, you can just click render only and it'll stop calculating them. There we go. But can you see, if I change these to squares actually, be nice and clear. And hide our stencil for temporarily. There we go. So whilst particles are coming from the spray can, it's going to receive them, and then they start fading out like so. And that's just going to keep the efficiency up. It's going to make it simulate a little bit quicker, especially when we've got loads more polygons. You know, if I subdivide this and you know, you're going to multiply the number of polygons by 4. So, you know, you want to be a bit cautious on that stuff. But performance isn't going to be too bad either way, and we'll be able to utilize it. Okay, you can see our vertex map is not being fed any data again, so we need to go back here. And let's go and press play again. See what happens. That's looking good. Now, like I said, we're not using fade values, but if I did increase the fade to say 75% or something, you'll see it'll apply some wetness value and then it'll fade off immediately. So if you've got something like, I don't know, isopropyl alcohol, something that you drop onto a surface, it leaves like a wet mark, but then it evaporates almost immediately. That's where you'd want to use that fade value to be quite high like that. It's a pretty absurd example, I guess, but I've definitely had to do sort of weird projects like that where things fade away. Okay, just double checking things. I've turned the fade back off. Right, so I think we're ready to actually increase the resolution on this. We could let this run out, or cache out, I guess, but that's actually, is that fading still? Oh yeah, it is. Definitely don't want that on. So yeah, let's I think we increase the resolution of this mesh and then we actually cache that out to disk. But let's just subdivide. Now what you could do, and this is pretty crude, but what you could do is if you want to keep this as efficient as possible, let's turn our target spline on. Not target spline, sorry, our stencil spline. There we go. Oh, it's in the, there we go. So what you could do is you could go along here and you could really give it some serious subdivision along just these areas, and that might work. Let's try that. I'm going to just infill everything in this area. There we go. So essentially what we're doing is we're creating sort of higher resolution areas. So you can see some particles hit here, but they didn't hit down here. So and up here, look. So maybe actually we need to include sort of a bit more. This is why I think you should just include the whole. But if I subdivide, you can see we can just subdivide that area. And this resolution of this would be increased. Now, like I said, that's a reasonable saving on efficiency wise, but I don't think for our purpose, it's just in case we're not going to capture some of the stuff. So we're just going to subdivide the whole thing. Just one subdivision, not smooth subdivision. Hypernerbs is a bit of an old school thing. There we go. Press play. Our wet map should be generating data. Oh, stencil's turned off, of course. Press play again. Now you can see we're getting reasonable playback. When I say reasonable, you know, it's generating from thousands of particles. It's generating wet map data. So these things can be quite heavy, but I think it's going to work out quite nicely for our purposes here. There we go. It is quite dense. So that's a good sign. That means we're getting a nice, a bit of a clearer image. I think we could afford to go up one more notch in resolution. We're currently at, what are we in terms of polygons? We're currently at 61,000 polygons. If we bump it one more level, what size are these polygons actually? That's a good sign. Yeah, so these are 1 by 1. I think we need to go one step further and go to 0.5 by 0.5. Now this might get very heavy. This is where perhaps that optimization would come in handy. So yeah, you can see that's really starting to tell. But I think the results will be good. I'm just going to play little bits here and then we'll cache this out properly. Just pause the sim. Let's rotate around the back so we can see. I tend to do that. I tend to rotate around the back. If you can't get to the back, if it's like a closed object that you're applying this wet map on, just change the painted group to none, and you can just hide your emitter even. So we could just do that now. Yeah, there we go. So we can see it from the front. Press play. You can definitely tell it's chugging. Let me jump into the wet map tag and actually drop the resolution to 1 again. Or I should say 1 to start with. That's just so it's not doing any unnecessary processing. I don't think we're going to get anything from an extra high resolution wet map in this situation. It's mostly coming from the Vertex map. There we go. Okay. And obviously, the longer the particles are there for, the longer they're going to be adding to the vertex weight. So if the emitter is flying past a certain area, it's going to be less weight. And you'll just have to retime if you need to, that kind of stuff. So I'm going to do our first caching pass on this. It's going to be, what I might do is I might do a lower res one just to check and then go higher res. But since I have the time right now, I'm going to cache this out to an Alembic. So I'm going to go export, and then I'm going to hit Alembic, and we're going to save it. I'm just going to save it as the same as the project file name for now. In fact, yeah, that's fine. And then I'm going to just set it to the same timeline as the project. I think that's enough. Actually, let me just double check. Let's turn our wet map off for a second, and let's just double check with our spray paint. Go to the emission tab. I'm just going to drop the number down. Now, we're getting pretty slow playback here, so let's deactivate the wet map tag and try again. And now you can see, even with that deactivated and not calculating in the scene, we're getting still pretty slow playback. And this is because we have a really high polygon count on the collider object itself. So if we take a look at it in wireframe there, you can see it's really dense. So we're able to avoid this by having a separate low poly collider. So let's undo a few of those steps and before we subdivided. And what we'll do, there we are. that's a much lower polygon object now. So just before, I'm going to keep this as our collider. Let's duplicate this. And let's get rid of all the wet map stuff off the original collider. And let's call this the container wet map. Turn the collider tag, or delete the collider tag off that one. And then all of this should actually just work as is. Let's press play and make sure this is now working. Let's hide this original one. Because all it's doing is a proximity search. So it doesn't matter if it actually collides with this surface. It just matters that it has a particles as a source. So okay, let's kind of go back to where I was just going to go. Leave that on render only. Press play, and now this should play a little bit faster. That's good. Let's change spray paint. Let's drop the number of particles right down. There we go. All right, so I just want to let it play out a bit. I want to see the end of the timeline, that we've got full coverage. And then we'll cache out our Alembic. This sometimes takes some back and forth. You might need to recache, change some settings, recache, and so on. The more you do it, the more you tend to kind of get a good first guess, but it's very common to just have to tweak some settings. Okay, so that actually looped, but it kind of cut off abruptly. So I'm going to make this a 400 frame. And that should... In fact, let me just jump. I'm just going to jump here, and that ends. Yeah, so if you see, we would have missed out on these particles here, and then there we go. Our last particles ended at 350 frames. So that's what I was, before I exported that Alembic, I just wanted to do a gut check, which is a good idea. So let's just subdivide this, give it its subdivision, and this is now our wet map that we're going to export. Let's just double check that it's receiving the wet map info. Oh, actually, that doesn't look like it is. It's not generating. We had it on render only. You definitely want to make sure that's unchecked so that the particles can transfer the information to the vertex map. Otherwise, that would only occur on render time, which would not be good for us. Okay, and you can see this is a much higher res sort of sim here. Let's just let it play on a little and see if it captures. Just turning the wires off there. There we go. And it looks a little patchy, as you can see, and that's because we actually reduced the particle count down by a factor of 10 earlier. So let's add that 0 back on, get it back up to 40,000, press play. There we go. And generating the wet map isn't so much about the particles, it's more about the density of the actual surface itself. So you can see that we're actually pretty much getting the same playback speed, which is very low, but it's 1 frame a second. It's not the end of the world. There we go. So we're getting full coverage of that corner there. That's nice. And just let it play on. I was just going to let it play on a little bit more, just make sure we're getting full coverage. Yeah. So I'm quite happy to let that go. And like I said, I've got some time, so I could always let that recache out if there's any problems. If not, I would do a lower res one so it's nice and quick, and then I'd do any fixes. But this time I'm going to just export this out. So let's go back to where we were, which is File, Export, Alembic. And then, let's leave it as that name, press Save. Then we get our options. Now, like I said, it goes up to 350. It's probably a good idea to only do up to that point, because otherwise you're going to end up with much more data than you need. In fact, I'm going to cancel this one again, because when does our particle emission start? That's a good point. It starts off right away, so that's probably... Well, we can offset this stuff in a cache, but actually I think I might want to... You know what? No, I'm going to leave that as is. When does it start moving? Frame 10. So we should definitely have it start at frame 10. That might also explain why that corner gets so densely packed, densely covered. There we go. I just want to make sure that it starts moving at the same time as it starts emitting. Awesome. All right, so let's export our Alembic. It's been a struggle for it. Press save. 350, remember. And then it's the selection only. And this tends to remember the last settings you used. And it looks like I've used it for pretty much a similar scenario. So UVs we want to keep. Vertex maps we want to keep. If you had selections on there for textures and stuff, you might want to store those as well. But for now, I just want the wet map to be and the UVs. Hit OK. And we'll export that Alembic. Now I'm going to let that cache out. It'll take some time, and because of the number of polygons, it'll probably be quite a large cache, a couple of gigabytes, maybe 3 or 4. But it won't take too long, and I'll come back. I'll let you know how long it took, and then we'll pick up from there. All right, so that's now cached out. It took around about 7-8 minutes. I didn't check exactly the time, but it was within a 10-minute window, easy. So that's actually not too bad. And let's merge that back in. So now that we've cached it out as an Alembic, let's merge it back in. Go to merge, and then we can see it here. It's a bit of a monster, 3.7 gig. Although I'll say that is not the smallest one I've seen. That's pretty huge. Even I've seen sort of 20 gig ones, which are kind of unwieldy. But that's fine. So now I've brought it back in. Now I could move this around in here, but first off, I'm going to deactivate all the other stuff that's going to simulate. So obviously our wet map is still active. So first off, let's go to the basic tab of that and disable that completely. And whilst we're at it, let's just deactivate our particles. We don't need them running. And if we just press play now, nothing's going to occur. It's going to play pretty fast. But if I click on our vertex map up here, again, can't see anything going on because we're still displaying this one. So let's hide that. And then let's see how that looks. And this, remember, is the particles spray painting this onto this surface. And I think that looks pretty cool. And remember, this is going to be, we're going to use this really as a mask. So if I just drop our material onto this, and I go to the vertex map, and I select this. Oh, I need to put that on here actually, sorry. There we go. As long as it's got the same name, which is Vertex Map. Yeah, Map V. Let's click on that one there. Just make sure it's respecting that. And you can see we get a nice feedback here. Very quick. In fact, what we're probably going to be doing with this piece of geometry is actually alphaing it out. So if I drag this Vertex Map into the alpha slot, you kind of get an idea of what we're going to be doing. So this is what that wet map's going to look like. And then if I turn the shipping container back on and we just bring this forward a touch, we'll turn shadows off it, of course. So I just bring that forward a touch. There we go. And then I'd tell it not to cast any shadows so that it doesn't look weird at all. And it's just it's just the paint on the surface. We could even drop the vertex map into the bump as well, just to give it a bit of depth. I'm using, obviously, a Cinema 4D shader here just for the viewport. That's, just to test things out. If I go to editor and I'll change the resolution to like 1024. Oh, it's not the resolution. It's actually so actually I can go back to default. If I go to options and I go to transparency, we'll get like a more accurate representation of our map. Maybe we can go back to 1024. There we go. And that's actually kind of a clue in of what that's going to be like. And the beauty of this Alembic is that you can just scrub it like this, which I absolutely love. It's very satisfying. I won't do it too much more. There we go. So that's looking pretty nice. What I was going to say is that we can layer up noises and stuff to kind of break it up and give it more kind of crisp detail and things like that. So, you might have, let's give it a UV texture, stuff like this. You can increase the detail or sort of by adding noises into it. I mean, that's a horrible noise, but you get the meaning. It's basically designed so that we can overlay noises and stuff like that. But once we've got the data, once we've got the vertex map, we can do all sorts with it. So that's pretty cool looking. We have a couple more tasks to do in this scene, and then we're done with it. One is we'll probably cache the particles. But before, well, actually, we don't actually necessarily need to cache the particles. We definitely need to cache the shipping logo geometry out. So let's turn this back on. Where's our shipping logo? Oh, that's this one. Let's just call that stencil. I keep forgetting which one that is. I've put it in here because I'm going to put some bend deformers to bring the stencil on and off. So here we go. In fact, let's do that now. Why not? So let's drop a bend deformer in with the stencil. I tend to like to fit it to the parent, but it's got no parent at the moment. So let's just give it a bend. Otherwise, we don't know what it's going to look like. And then I'm going to rotate it so that not that way. Rotate that way. There we go. Rotate 90 this way. Let's shrink it down quite a bit. Now, I want it to be quite sort of a tight bend, so I'm probably going to increase the rotation. Oh, I want to keep the length of the object as well. If I don't keep axis length, it's going to stretch it beyond its actual size. Oops. Not that one, not that one. Just playing a bit of guesswork there. There you go. That's a bit more realistic. In fact, I can just make it 0. And then I need to orient it. Or actually, a couple of things. I need to make sure the axis length is there. I also might make it a little of a lot. Well, let's make it quite a large curl. Something like that. Yeah, it just means it will exit a bit more gracefully. And we just need to orient it up like so. So I'm just tilting up a little bit. I'm using the world axis to move it. If you notice, I keep flicking between. I hit W. And there we go. We can see that we're going to peel this on nicely. Probably start keyframing that from... Well, actually, it's going to need to be early on, isn't it? So we're going to be shifting along some of these animations, I think. So first of all, let's shift it on. Maybe a couple of seconds, I guess. It doesn't need to be crazy long. Maybe 3 seconds. There we go, like so. I'm going to turn off the emitter for now, just so this is nice and quick. There we go. And you can see that everything's happening a bit too early, so we can actually offset this. Let's start playing 40, 60, 90 frames. There we go. And we could actually simply offset all the other stuff as well by 90 frames. Yeah, let's do that. So what we can do here is we can just say X plus... Well, it's going to start at 90. So so the offset in the Alembic starts at 0. So we do need to add another 90 to this. So X plus 90. So it starts at 100. Does that make sense? There we go. And then that's the stencil, and then the emitter itself. So X plus 90. Just plus 90, there we go. Let's turn that on, make sure that's operating correctly. We can make sure the wet map's still off, yep. Nice. Okay, just landing. Nicely done. And then the emission should start. There we go. And if I hide our emitter, well, we don't need to hide our emitter actually. Let's just Yeah, no, let's hide the emitter. You can see our wet map is being painted on. Is it being painted on correctly? Yes, it is. Perfect. Okay, so let's just turn that off whilst we've made that offset change. Always good to save as well. So in comes our... Well, I'll probably scale the logo up as well or something, or fade it in using opacities. There we go. Then once it's finished drawing, which is now going to be offset, so we need to add a few more frames. So maybe let's add another 300. There we go. So that's where it finishes painting. And I think it's probably safe to start animating away at about 450. So we're going to add another bend object. I might just duplicate this one. So we'll call this one in and out. And I'm going to drop the keyframes off this one. So just hold Control and Shift whilst I paint those out. And if I move this one along, it's just going to repeat. They're both exactly the same bend operation. I want this one to fold out from the other side. So if I rotate... Oh, let me get my head around this. I think it's this way. So exactly like so. And that peels out and goes off that side. It's going to be quite a satisfying... I want it to be quite a satisfying moment where it reveals that logo. So maybe we want to increase the folding. Oh yeah, kind of spirals out. That's quite nice. Drifts away. Okay, so I'm going to add a keyframe here. And we'll do another 90 frames. So it's 450 plus 90. Because why do it in your head when you can do that? There we go. Let's just press play, make sure that feels natural. We're not getting real-time playback. If you want real-time playback, make sure you hit the all frames off there. And away we go. That is quite quick. I think that's fine though. I quite like quick reveal. Away it goes. And like I said, we'll fade it or something. But first of all, we need to apply our vertex weight to them. I might turn off our container wet map for now, just keep performance perfect or good enough. And I'm going to go back from this mode to, I'm going to turn transparency off. When you're in transparency mode in OpenGL, the anti-aliasing goes, so you get kind of nasty jaggies and stuff. It's a minor thing, but yeah, just a limitation. Okay, so let's first of all, we're going to need to convert this. So this object is currently a obviously it's a solid, or sorry, a generator. So it's an actual extrude. So I'm going to make this editable, or actually first, before I do that, we're going to decide on the resolution of that mesh. We can obviously just subdivide later on. So in fact, yeah, let's just do that. Let's subdivide later on. I'm going to keep that there. I'm going to duplicate this and I'm going to put this into our construction folder and just turn all that stuff off. Just make sure it's off. Just enable collisions, make sure everything's absolutely deactivated from the scene. You can put it on a layer and deactivate the layer, of course. For now, I'm just going to use this. Okay, and I'm going to display this. Now, our polys are reversed, if you recall. Oh, in fact, sorry, I shouldn't have got rid of our stencil there. Let's undo these steps. Undo. I just need to create the... Do you remember? I just need to recreate the wet map duplicate. So this is now, instead of the stencil or collider, this is the wet map. What do I call the other one? Just container wet map. Let's just call this stencil wet map. Nice and simple on the name convention. There we go. Let's take all that stuff off. I'm going to reverse the keyframes. I'm going to reverse the normals. I just hit U and then R, which is this command, reverse normals. And it's just to make sure that it's facing the right way. Probably just for textures, to be honest. That's the only reason I'm going to do that. I just want to double check the UV as well and see if it's a good one or if I'm going to need to work on it. It looks okay. I think we can fill this space. It's currently scaled. So if we double click that, or even if we go into our Uving layout, so BP UV edit, just a very, very quick and simple, I'm just going to match this to the size of the scene. These all look pretty square on though, so it's just using the extrude objects UVs. I just wanted to make sure it fills this space. So all you need to do is you need to hit max, not max UV, sorry, fit UV to canvas. There we go. And it might look stretched, but if we're going to use textures later on, I can just scale those textures down and it'll just utilize the full size of a texture. So start up, there we go. And now all we need to do is add the wet map stuff. So we could just copy and paste it. So I can just grab it off this one and drop it onto there. Now this has a selection tag that we don't need, so I'm just going to delete that. Click on this wet map tag and make sure it's associated with this vertex map out. Now I'm going to leave the same name because obviously that means that all our materials and everything will work nicely with that. We could give it a different name. And no, in fact, there's a good practice to give it a different name just so that we can wet map stencil V. There we go. It's just good practice because then we can address it separately, or we can just combine it with the other one because there's only one other, so it's fine. So that's definitely the right one. It's all set up. This is currently turned off, so we need to turn it on. And first of all, let's just turn this all back on and make sure that it can transfer. Oh, sorry. One last thing. In the tag, we need to set a source. Now it's no longer the painted source, it is the stencil group. So let's press play. And let's watch the particles get thrown. Oh, I mean, I've got all frames deactivated, which is why it's kind of going crazy there. Let's press play. All I'm doing here is I'm checking that the particles are actually hitting the mesh here. There we go. Excellent. And you can see our paint is transferring, if you like to call it that. There we go. Because obviously in real life a stencil gets covered in the paint that it's applying to the surface. So we obviously need this, otherwise it'll look a bit weird. So that's looking good to me. It's transferring okay. The wet map is working correctly. We just need to increase the resolution of everything quite significantly again. So let's tell you what, let's display the other wet map and we'll kind of get an idea. What were the size of the polys on this one? I think they were 0.25 or 0.5. Yeah. So they're 0.5 by 0.5. So we kind of want the same resolution on this wet map here, on the stencil wet map, and it's currently, yep, 2. So if we subdivide once, we're going to get 1s, and then subdivide one more time. You can see that's very high res. Now I just want to double check. I'm going to turn off our. Oh, no, let's not turn off the collider. Let's just turn off the wet map for a second. I just want to double check, and let's turn off the emitter actually. Just check that it deforms okay. Yep, looks nice. And if I put this material on it, and I set it to front, there we go. Comes in, animates, gets spray painted, and then folds away. Okay, awesome. So next up, as we did before, we're going to cache this one out. And let's just double check those settings. Let's turn this back on, turn the emitter back on. And I think we are good to go. Okay, so stencil wet map is selected. Now how many polys is that? That's 135, so this might be even larger than the last one. We'll see. In fact, how many polys was this one? Oh, that was 250. So we should see about half the size in terms of Alembic file. So this one's called stencil wet map. I'm just going to copy the name so that when I export it, go export, Alembic. This one I'm going to add, I'm just going to call this stencil wet map .abc, press save. Now, we have actually changed the range, if you recall. So we need to add 90 frames to each of these. So that's good. I'm going to make it 450 just to be safe. Selection only, visibility, UV maps, all that stuff. Merge generated, we're all good. Okay, so hit OK, let it cache out, and we'll come back after this is cached as well. Okay, so that one's now cached out, and I'm just going to deactivate some stuff before I bring that other one in. So let's deactivate the wet map, and we can just turn the emitter off for now. Let's merge in our new cache, which is the wet map. Stencil wet map. In we come. Now I can see immediately there's an issue. Can you see it's actually cached it and it's put it down over here? But we've still got the vertex map in there, and that's nicely animated. Beautiful. Excellent. But it's in the wrong position. So we can just, essentially, it needs to be in here. And we also need to zero out the PSR. So we just run the PSR, reset PSR command. And we can hide our original wet map here. There we go, that brings in, and then this then captures all the paint that's getting masked away, and that then pulls off as well. Awesome. So this is getting pretty close to completion. Let's just put a test material on that. I'm just going to duplicate this one. If I throw this on here, and that's, well, it's not going to be an alpha, is it? It's going to, let's clear that. In fact, let's just create a new material. I'm faffing for no reason there. That's new material. Assign it over there. And then what we'll do is in the color channel, we'll put our vertex map. Which is this. Oh, no, it's not that one. It's this one. There we go. Vertex map stencil. There we go. And then I could just say, I don't know, let's just multiply it over this color, whatever this will be. And this is pretty much just how this is going to work. This isn't alphaed all the way around like the other one was. This will just be layering up under a different color. So even if we actually got the layer here, the layer shader. Oh, actually, vertex maps don't display through layer shaders in the viewport. It's just a limitation of how the threading works with a layer shader. So we actually need to go to the fusion. And I mean, we could just make the background something like that. Make it multiply, something like that. Or even just use the mask. So we could use this as the mask. Let's take the color out of that. I just turned the color off on that other one. So one color goes here. This is like our base material for the whatever the stencil color is going to be. And then mask in whatever the paint color is going to be. And the stencil itself is probably going to be a grayish color, but we don't have to the beauty of this whole process being procedural is that we don't have to decide that until we go to the render stage. So there we go. There we go. Those are hideous colors, but just to make the point. Animates in. Nicely, gets painted all over, and then pulls out over that way. Awesome. So there's a last couple of things to do here, and that's we'll cache out the emitter and stuff. So if I just let our emitter run here, just check the timing on things. Okay, so that looks like it's timed correctly. Looking pretty cool. Let's jump down to our... Where is our other wet map? Oh, it's this one here, isn't it? Container wet map. Oh, I deleted the material, did I? There we go. If I just hide our emitter and stuff. Ooh, just the emitter. Oh, does it appear that our... Oh, I'm putting it on the wrong... Doesn't need to be on because I put it on the wrong object. There we go. Okay. So let's put that there. Is that synced? Yep. Obviously it wouldn't be white in the background there. It should be the same color as the paint on the surface. And then that's going to peel away to reveal our nicely stenciled logo. And in the next part, we'll be adding our X-Particles graffiti sim to that stencil animation. So I'll see you in part 4.